Hello, you found Stephen Hernandez's Nonprofit Fundamentals. This is a channel where I discuss relationships, nonprofit issues, resources for both of the above. Thank you so much again for following my channel. If you're new here, please feel free to subscribe, hit that subscribe button and the little bell so you get more notifications. I do a mix, as I said, of nonprofit information and relationship information. So today what I want to talk about is a pretty heavy subject, and it's about colorism in general, but really in the context of relationships. I am Mexican, so I'm going to speak about this in my own personal context. In the description, I'm going to provide information for other ethnicities or people who've spoken about this in their own channels or in their own work, who really kind of informed this conversation for me beyond my personal experience. Something I would say that many communities, but I would speak specifically about the Latino or Latinx community, really seems to be in denial of, is that colorism with regards to our relationships, our dating, our kids, is not a thing. And I'm always shocked by that because if you come from a Hispanic household, I think if you search your memory banks, you'll remember your abuela, just like mine, my grandma saying, "Don't go outside. Don't be out in the sun because you don't want to get dark. You don't want to get black." Actually, that was the phrasing that was always used. I would encourage you, again, for those who catch this in the comments below, let me know what messages did you hear around color growing up, because that's really what we're talking about here. Did your parents or your family members, would they say things like, "Oh, like so and so is so light skinned," right? Like, like, or maybe in your native language, in your family, were certain family members prized, or maybe certain branch of the family was like, "Oh, so and so's, like their family. Well, he married a Weta, like, or he married a Blakia, right? He married a white woman, so his kids, they look very nice. They're very handsome." Or on the reverse, if someone married someone who was made of darker skin or had kinky hair or whatnot, were they always were any compliments or disrespect shown to them in a way that was always centered around their color? I remember members of my own family, when they would speak, or they would see like a beautiful woman who had like quote unquote black or African features, they would say things like, "Well, she looks nice, for a black person," or like, she looks okay." Like, it was always as if the blackness or the African descent or darker features, whatever they may be, was like a handicap, if you will. They somehow managed to overcome, and good for them. And so that kind of backdrop, that casual or maybe even overt racism that we heard growing up, we really need to think about in the context of our relationships. So, first of all, how did that make you feel, right? For those of us who maybe have indigenous features, who maybe have more African features, again, speaking specifically in Hispanic context, if you're Mexican, if you're Central or South American, your genetic makeup is probably a big amalgamation of the European blood, indigenous blood, and African blood. Obviously, we know that there are many indigenous communities that have really kind of survived the conquest, and so you might be like, primarily or even full blood indigenous. But what was the message around that? Were people who around you, did they denigrate you or your family members for how you looked, how you spoke, the color of your skin? And then how did that make you feel? So, as someone who does matchmaking, one of the questions I always ask people when I start that process is, when did people start to notice you romantically or physically? And how did that make you feel? Like, how did they communicate that to you? So a number of people have talked about how people would maybe compliment certain features of their bodies, but again, if they had quote unquote different features, people would comment on that. They would say things like, "Oh, your hair would be so nice if it was straightened," or, maybe if you didn't go out in the sun so much, you wouldn't be so dark, and you would look nicer. And again, it's that message over and over and over again, often in our own homes, often in our own families, where that really affects us growing up. To give a personal example, I have heard many times a version of the story is that from my own father's background, that one of his brothers, who was the lightest of his brothers, was, according to my father, um, really the one who was favored and was listened to and was held up over the other brothers who may or may not have been darker. I don't know if that's true or not, but my father certainly felt that it was. And I think many people have either felt, or have really directly seen that the way that they are perceived, valued, loved, has a direct correlation to their outward appearance. And then let's take that externally in our relationships, right? You will hear things, people will comment, and this is where it gets heavy, right? Where, like, maybe if you're like a mid skin tone, if you will, like mine, people will say, like, well, if you married a white girl, your kids would look really light, as if that's a good thing. Like, that's still, like, as if that's still something that we should strive for. As I said, you'll see some historical information, like the caste system that was imposed in Mexico and other places in Latin America, other things like that throughout the world. But let's not kid ourselves. This idea that there is a hierarchy of skin tone is a very real thing that persists to this day. To this day. And so you need to question yourself in terms of, if you have a certain quote-unquote type, why is that? Is your preference like light-skinned people just cause? Like, why? What is the reasoning behind that? How has that affected your options? We talk about that a lot in terms of what is available to you, what is not. How has that affected you? What have you been told? What has your family communicated to you in terms of what is okay and what's appropriate? How has this concept really affected you in terms of your relationships, what you're seeking, what is possible for you? Not literally possible, but like communicated to you as, like, well, that's you shouldn't have kids with them because people wouldn't treat them kindly. And think about that statement. And people will say things like that, like, well, that's nice that you love someone who has like dark features or indigenous features, but if you have kids, people won't treat them nicely. They'll look different from their cousins. And what a corrosive and terrible thing that is. That they're acknowledging, well, our family's racist, but like that's not something that we care to fight. And really, that is ultimately what it's going to be about, right? Where it's a concept of, is this something are you willing to do the work to be anti-racist, to be anti-colorism for yourself, for your partner, and then for your family? And that, I guess, is the real question, which I've dealt with a number of times before when people have talked to me about cross-cultural or interracial relationships. I can't answer that question. Only you can. But it's definitely something you need to answer for yourself before things get serious with anyone that you're considering to be in a relationship with. Heavy subject, I know. A lot of links, a lot of people who are much more informed about this topic in terms of a historical context than I am. Linked below. Please comment in the comment section. What messages around that were you told? Like, how did that affect you? How does it make you feel to this day? How are you trying to change this concept in your own family and your own relationships? Again, thank you so much. This is Steve Hernandez's Nonprofit Fundamentals. If this was at all of interest to you, go ahead and follow the link to the rest of my relationship or nonprofit videos. Feel free to subscribe. Thank you, as always, for watching this video. Please share it with someone who you think would be of value to. Thank you so much, and take care.